The weathered thermos slipped from Tom Mitchell's trembling hands, Martha's 3-year-old apple cider spilling crimson across the pristine snow as desperate animal cries shattered the Thanksgiving morning silence. Below the crumbling ice ledge, a brown bear cub thrashed helplessly in the black water of Bear Creek Lake, its tiny paws clawing frantically at the slick surface while death crept closer with each passing second. The massive mother bear, scarred and magnificent, paced the shoreline in agonizing circles, her thunderous roars echoing off the Smoky Mountain peaks like a mother's prayer turned to screaming grief. Tom's arthritic fingers found his chest as his damaged heart hammered against his ribs, the same chest pains that had been warning him for months that time was running out. This wasn't how the 67-year-old retired fire captain had planned to spend his final goodbye to these mountains, standing between a drowning innocent and its desperate mother, with no backup, no equipment, and a body that had already failed him too many times. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, watching the cub's movements grow weaker. How long did they have before the ice claimed another victim? And would his firefighter's oath to save every life finally be the death of him? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Tom Mitchell had awakened that Thanksgiving morning in the same silence that had suffocated him for 3 years. The kind of quiet that made every creak of the old Nashville house sound like Martha's footsteps coming down the stairs. At 67, he moved through his empty home like a ghost haunting his own life, swallowing pills that kept his damaged heart beating while everything else inside him felt dead. The kitchen counter held evidence of his slow surrender, a realtor's business card, paperwork for Sunset Manor Assisted Living, and 12 unsent text messages to his daughter Sarah glowing on his phone screen. Each message started the same way: "Sweetheart, I'm sorry." And each one remained unfinished, pride and stubbornness choking off the words like smoke in his throat. Martha's ashes sat in a simple wooden box on the mantelpiece, waiting. For 3 years he'd promised to scatter them in the Smoky Mountains where they'd taken Sarah camping every Thanksgiving, back when family meant something more than polite Christmas cards and birthday calls that lasted exactly 4 minutes. Back when his daughter looked at him like he was a hero instead of a burden she was too guilty to abandon completely. The last real conversation they'd had ended with Sarah's voice cracking through tears. "Daddy, please just come to California. The kids barely know their grandfather, and I can't keep worrying about you falling down those stairs or having another heart attack alone." His response had been pure, stubborn male pride wrapped in fear. "I don't need taking care of, Sarah Elizabeth. I raised you just fine without anyone's help." 6 months of silence followed. 6 months of Sarah's number lighting up his phone while he sat frozen, too proud to answer, too broken to explain that moving to California felt like admitting Martha was really gone, that selling the house where they'd loved and fought and raised their daughter meant accepting that the best parts of his life were over. This morning, loading Martha's ashes and her favorite thermos into his backpack, Tom had made a decision. One last hike to their special place by Bear Creek Lake, where Martha had said yes to his clumsy proposal 42 years ago. He'd scatter her ashes, then drive straight to Sunset Manor and sign the papers. Maybe Sarah would forgive him eventually. Maybe she'd understand that some men are better at fighting fires than facing their own broken hearts. The 2-hour drive through winding mountain roads had felt like a funeral procession, Martha's ghost riding shotgun, her voice echoing in his memory. "Thomas Mitchell, you're the most stubborn man I ever met, but you're also the bravest. Don't you dare let pride steal what's left of our family." Now, standing at the edge of catastrophe with a dying bear cub and its desperate mother, Tom realized Martha might have sent him one final lesson about what it really meant to save a life. The bear cub's desperate squealing cut through Tom like a blade, triggering muscle memory from 40 years of emergency calls. His firefighter training kicked in automatically, assessed the scene, identify hazards, prioritize lives, but this wasn't a burning building with standard protocols. This was nature at its most brutal, and he was just one old man with a bad heart standing between life and death. The ice extended about 15 feet from shore, spider-webbed with stress fractures that showed where the cub had broken through. The water beneath was black as coffee, so cold that steam rose from its surface like the breath of something alive and hungry. Tom could see the cub's strength failing with each frantic paddle, its small head barely above water now, eyes wide with the kind of terror that transcended species. The mother bear, Tom found himself thinking of her as Luna because of the crescent-shaped scar across her left shoulder, paced the shoreline with increasing desperation. She was magnificent and terrifying, easily 400 pounds of muscle and protective fury, her winter coat thick and dark against the snow. Every few seconds she'd rear up on her hind legs, scanning the lake as if looking for a solution her human-sized brain couldn't quite grasp. What struck Tom most was her intelligence. This wasn't mindless animal panic. Luna had clearly tried multiple rescue attempts. Paw prints in the snow showed where she'd tested the ice edge. Claw marks on nearby trees suggested she'd tried to find branches long enough to reach her cub. She'd even attempted to break the ice by jumping on it, leaving large impact craters that had only made the situation worse. Tom's chest tightened as he watched Luna's futile efforts. The parallel hit him like a physical blow. Here was another parent watching helplessly as their child slipped away, just like he'd watched Martha fade through months of chemotherapy. Just like he was watching his relationship with Sarah crumble through stubborn silence. "Easy, girl," Tom said softly, his voice carrying the calm authority he'd used with panicked fire victims. "I know what you're feeling." Luna swung her massive head toward him, and for a moment their eyes met. Tom had expected to see wild animal fury, but instead he saw something achingly familiar. The look of a parent pushed beyond all limits, willing to trade places with their suffering child if such a trade were possible. The cub's movements were growing weaker. Hypothermia was setting in fast, and Tom knew from ice water rescue training that the small body wouldn't last much longer. Decision time. He could hike back to his truck, drive until he found cell service, call for professional help, but the cub would be dead long before anyone arrived, or he could trust his old skills, his emergency kit, and 40 years of experience pulling people from impossible situations. Tom slipped off his backpack with hands that shook only slightly, muscle memory taking over as he inventoried his supplies. 50 feet of climbing rope, carabiners from his rock climbing days with Martha, a compact emergency blanket, and the multi-tool that had saved more lives than he could count. Not much, but it would have to be enough. "All right, Luna," he said, assembling his makeshift rescue system while keeping one eye on the increasingly frantic mother bear. "Your baby's not dying on my watch." The cub let out a weak cry that sounded heartbreakingly like a human infant, and Tom felt something inside his chest crack open, not his damaged heart, but something deeper. For the first time in 3 years, something needed him. Not his pension, not his insurance, not his signature on legal documents. Just him, Thomas Mitchell, the man who'd spent 4 decades proving that every life was worth saving. Time to find out if he still had one more rescue left in him. Tom's hands moved with the steady precision of someone who'd rigged emergency rescue systems in burning buildings, but the bitter cold made every knot a battle against stiff fingers and racing time. He anchored his climbing rope to the largest pine tree near the shore, testing the system twice before committing his weight to it. The ice creaked ominously under his boots as he distributed his body across the surface, crawling on his belly toward the increasingly still form of the drowning cub. Luna watched his every movement with laser intensity, her massive head tracking his progress across the treacherous ice. Tom had expected her to charge, to see him as another threat to her baby, but instead she seemed to understand his intent. She stood motionless except for the steady rhythm of her breathing, creating clouds of vapor in the frigid air, as if she too were holding her breath for the outcome. The rope system worked exactly as Tom had calculated. Years of technical rescue training guided his movements as he approached the break in the ice, where the cub floated in water so cold it made Tom's eyes water just looking at it. The little bear's paddle strokes had weakened to feeble movements, its head barely above the surface, dark eyes fixing on Tom with what looked disturbingly like hope. "Come on, baby," Tom whispered, fashioning a loop in the rope. "Let's get you back to Mama." His first throw missed, the stiff rope fighting against the cold air. The second attempt brushed the cub's side but slipped off its wet fur. Tom's heart hammered against his ribs as he watched the cub's strength visibly failing, its breathing becoming shallow and rapid, classic signs of severe hypothermia. One more chance, maybe two, before those dark eyes closed forever. The third throw was perfect. The loop settled gently around the cub's midsection, and Tom began the delicate process of pulling the small body through the water toward safety. The cub didn't struggle. It was either too weak or smart enough to recognize salvation when it came. Tom could feel every ounce of its weight through the rope, could sense the trembling of its exhausted muscles as he slowly, carefully drew it closer to the ice edge. The moment the cub cleared the water, Luna moved. Not with the explosive charge Tom had feared, but with careful, deliberate steps that spoke to an intelligence that made his skin prickle. She approached the ice edge where Tom was gently lifting her baby to safety, and instead of snatching the cub away, she waited, watched, as if she understood that the rescue wasn't complete, that her baby still needed human help to survive. Tom wrapped the shivering cub in his emergency blanket, feeling the rapid flutter of its heartbeat against his chest. The little bear was hypothermic but alive, its breathing steady, its eyes alert. As he prepared to hand the bundle to its mother, something extraordinary happened. Luna gently touched Tom's outstretched hand with her massive paw, not a swipe or a threat, but something that felt remarkably like gratitude. But instead of taking her rescued cub and disappearing into the forest as Tom expected, Luna did something that made his blood run cold. She nudged the wrapped cub toward Tom, then turned and ran toward the tree line, stopping after 20 yards to look back at him expectantly. Her message was unmistakable. "Follow me." Tom's firefighter instincts screamed warnings. Never trust a wild animal, never follow a bear into dense forest, never assume you understand their behavior. But Luna's actions defied every rule he'd learned about wildlife. She was asking, no, begging, for his continued help. Carrying the still warming cub against his chest, Tom followed Luna deeper into the pine forest. The snow was deeper here, making each step a struggle for his aging legs, but Luna moved with purpose, frequently checking to ensure he was keeping up. After what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, she led him to a massive fallen oak tree near a small creek. The sound hit Tom first, a weak, pitiful crying that was different from the water-distressed calls of the first cub. Luna approached the fallen tree and nosed at something underneath, her movements careful and precise. When Tom knelt beside her to look, his heart nearly stopped. Trapped beneath the enormous trunk was a second cub, smaller than the first, its hind leg clearly pinned and possibly broken. Fresh claw marks on the bark showed where Luna had tried desperately to free her other baby, but the tree was simply too massive for even her considerable strength to move. Tom stared at the trapped cub, then at Luna, then at the first cub still bundled in his arms, and felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. This wasn't one rescue, it was two, and the second one would require everything he had left. Luna looked at him with those impossibly intelligent eyes, and Tom could swear he saw a question there. "Will you help this one too?" "Jesus Christ," Tom whispered, his damaged heart already protesting the strain of what lay ahead. "All right, girl, let's save them both." The fallen oak was a monster, easily 3 feet in diameter, and God knew how many tons of dead weight pinning Luna's second cub against the frozen ground. Tom set the first cub down carefully in a sheltered spot between 2 pine trees, wrapping it more securely in the emergency blanket before turning his attention to what seemed like an impossible task. The trapped cub whimpered softly, its dark eyes fixed on its mother with the kind of trust that made Tom's chest ache. Luna had positioned herself where she could see both cubs, her massive head swiveling between them like a mother trying to comfort 2 sick children at once. She nosed the trapped cub gently, making soft rumbling sounds that Tom had never heard a bear make, something between a purr and a lullaby that spoke to maternal instincts older than civilization. Tom knelt beside the fallen tree, his knees protesting against the cold ground as he assessed the situation with the methodical approach that had saved countless lives during his firefighting career. The cub's hind leg was pinned but not crushed. The ground had given way slightly under the tree's weight, creating a depression that had probably saved the little bear's life. Still, the leg was clearly injured and hypothermia was setting in despite the cub's thick fur. "I need leverage," Tom muttered, his breath creating clouds in the increasingly cold air. He studied the surrounding area, looking for anything that could serve as a fulcrum point. About 10 feet away, a sturdy maple had fallen at an angle, its trunk creating a natural ramp. If he could find a long enough lever. The solution came from an unexpected source. Luna had been watching his movements with intense concentration, and when Tom began searching for a suitable branch, she seemed to understand. The massive bear moved to a nearby birch tree and began clawing at its base with purposeful strikes. It took Tom a moment to realize what she was doing. She was trying to bring down a tree that could serve as his lever. "Smart girl," Tom said, his voice filled with admiration and growing worry about what he was witnessing. This level of problem-solving, this apparent understanding of his needs, went beyond anything he'd heard about bear intelligence. But there was no time to marvel at Luna's cognition. Her baby was suffering, and the afternoon shadows were growing longer as the temperature continued to drop. Working together in a partnership that defied nature, Tom and Luna managed to bring down the birch. Tom used his multi-tool to strip away the smaller branches, while Luna used her powerful jaws to snap off the ones too thick for his blade. Within 20 minutes, they had created a 12-foot lever that might be strong enough to lift the oak enough for the cub to escape. As Tom positioned the lever against the fallen maple trunk, his phone buzzed in his pocket. The brief burst of signal in this small clearing had delivered a flood of text messages from Sarah, each one more frantic than the last. The timestamps showed she'd been trying to reach him since yesterday evening. "Dad, please call me back. I'm worried. Dad, I know we fought, but I need to know you're okay. Dad, I'm flying to Nashville tonight. Please answer your phone. Dad, I love you. Please don't shut me out anymore." The last message had arrived just an hour ago. "I'm at your house. Your neighbor said you took the truck toward the mountains. I'm calling search and rescue." Tom's hands shook as he read Sarah's words, but not from the cold. His stubborn pride had driven his daughter to the point of panic, and here he was, miles from anywhere, about to attempt something that could very well kill him. If he died out here, Sarah would blame herself for not trying harder to reach him. The thought was unbearable. But the trapped cub whimpered again, and Luna looked at him with those impossibly expressive eyes, and Tom knew he couldn't abandon this rescue any more than he could have left a person trapped in a burning building. Some things mattered more than safety, more than common sense, more than the fear of dying alone in the wilderness. "All right, Luna," he said, positioning himself at the long end of the lever. "When I lift, you pull your baby out. You understand?" Luna's response was to position herself precisely where she needed to be to grab the cub the moment it was free. Tom had worked with human partners who communicated less effectively. The physics were brutal. Tom's aging body strained against the lever, his damaged heart hammering as he fought to lift dead weight that outweighed him by hundreds of pounds. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. The oak seemed immovable, rooted in place by its own massive weight and the frozen ground beneath it. Then, slowly, incredibly, the trunk began to rise. Just an inch, then two, then enough for Luna to work her massive paws underneath her trapped cub. She moved with surgical precision, gently grasping the injured baby and pulling it free just as Tom's strength gave out and the tree crashed back down. The rescued cub was hurt but alive. Its hind leg was definitely injured, probably sprained rather than broken, but it was breathing normally and responded to its mother's gentle nudging. Luna immediately began the process of warming both cubs with her body heat, arranging them against her belly while keeping watchful eyes on Tom. Tom collapsed against the fallen maple, his chest tight with exhaustion and the warning signs of cardiac stress. His heart medication was back in the truck, 2 miles away through increasingly treacherous terrain. Snow was beginning to fall more heavily, and the afternoon light was fading fast. He'd saved both cubs, but at what cost? As if sensing his distress, Luna did something that took Tom's breath away. She left her cubs for a moment and approached him, then carefully lay down beside him, offering the warmth of her massive body. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, that Tom felt tears freezing on his cheeks. "You're welcome, girl," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Both of them are going to be fine." Luna's response was to gently rest her great head against Tom's shoulder, and for a moment they stayed like that, an aging human and a wild bear, sharing warmth and the satisfaction of lives saved. In the growing twilight, with snow beginning to accumulate on their shoulders, Tom felt something he hadn't experienced since Martha's death. The deep peace that comes from knowing your life has purpose. But the peace was shattered by a new sound, the distant thrumming of helicopter rotors cutting through the winter air. Tom's phone had apparently transmitted his GPS coordinates during that brief signal burst, and Sarah had made good on her threat to call search and rescue. As the helicopter grew closer, Luna gathered her cubs and began moving toward deeper forest cover. But before disappearing entirely, she turned back one last time. In that moment, Tom could swear he saw something like gratitude in her dark eyes, and something else, recognition, as if she was memorizing his face for some future meeting. "Take care of those babies," Tom called after her, his voice carrying farther than it should have in the thin mountain air. The helicopter appeared over the tree line just as Luna and her cubs vanished into the shadows, leaving Tom alone with the evidence of an impossible partnership, broken branches, disturbed snow, and the lingering warmth where a wild mother had chosen to trust a human stranger with the lives of her children. As the rescue crew prepared to lower a basket, Tom touched the spot on his shoulder where Luna's head had rested and smiled despite his exhaustion. Martha would have loved this story. More importantly, he finally had something worth telling Sarah when she inevitably demanded to know what the hell he thought he was doing out here alone. Some rescues, he realized, saved more than just the victims. The helicopter's downdraft scattered snow like a miniature blizzard as the rescue basket descended through the pine canopy, but Tom barely noticed the chaos around him. His chest felt like someone had wrapped steel cables around his ribs and was slowly tightening them, each breath a struggle against the crushing weight of cardiac distress. The rescue had cost him more than he'd realized, and his body was finally presenting the bill. Through the mechanical thunder of rotor blades, Tom heard a voice that made his damaged heart skip entirely. Sarah's voice, transmitted through the helicopter's external speaker system, crackling with static and barely controlled panic. "Dad! Dad! Can you hear me? Don't you dare die on me, Thomas Mitchell." Even in his current state, Tom had to smile at his daughter's use of his full name. She only did that when she was terrified or furious, and right now she sounded like both. The rescue basket touched down beside him, and through the swirling snow he could see Sarah's face pressed against the helicopter's window, her hands flat against the glass like she was trying to reach through it to touch him. The paramedic who rappelled down was a young woman with kind eyes and steady hands, but she took one look at Tom's gray complexion and labored breathing and immediately began barking orders into her radio. "Base, this is Linda. I need a cardiac team standing by at University Medical. Male, approximately 70, presenting with chest pain, diaphoresis, and shortness of breath following extreme physical exertion in sub-freezing conditions." As Linda worked to stabilize him, checking vitals and preparing IV access, Tom found himself thinking about Luna and her cubs. Were they warm enough? Had the injured cub's leg been hurt worse than he'd thought? The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, possibly dying from the effort to save 2 bear cubs, while his own daughter was going through exactly what Luna had experienced watching her babies in mortal danger. "Sir, I need you to stay with me," Linda said, her voice cutting through his wandering thoughts. "Can you tell me your name?" "Tom Mitchell," he managed, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Retired Nashville Fire Department, Captain." "Well, Captain Mitchell, your daughter is pretty worked up about you. She's been coordinating this search since dawn, and I don't think she's slept in 36 hours. What were you doing out here alone in these conditions?" Tom tried to form words to explain about Martha's ashes, about the Thanksgiving tradition, about Luna and her cubs, but the effort was too much. Instead, he simply pointed toward the forest where the bear family had disappeared. "Had to help," he whispered. "Mother, babies, trapped." Linda followed his gaze, and her expression shifted from professional concern to something approaching awe. The evidence of what had happened was written in the snow around them, the massive paw prints, the disturbed area around the fallen oak, the broken branches arranged in ways that spoke of intelligent problem-solving. "Jesus," she breathed. "Were you working with a bear?" The basket ride to the helicopter was a blur of pain and oxygen masks, and Sarah's tear-streaked face appearing in the cabin door as they hauled him aboard. She immediately grabbed his hand, her grip fierce and desperate, as if she could anchor him to life through sheer force of will. "Don't you dare leave me alone, old man," she said, her voice breaking. "I already lost Mom." "I can't lose you, too." Tom squeezed her hand as hard as his failing strength allowed, wanting to tell her about the text messages he'd read, about how her words had given him the strength to attempt the rescue, about how proud he was that she'd organized a professional search when she realized he was in trouble. But the words wouldn't come, lost in the fog of cardiac crisis and oxygen deprivation. As the helicopter lifted off, Tom caught a glimpse of movement in the forest below. 3 dark shapes moving together through the snow. Luna and her cubs, alive and free because sometimes an old man's stubborn refusal to give up could still save lives. The sight filled him with a peace that had nothing to do with the morphine Linda was administering for his chest pain. The flight to University Medical Center took 23 minutes, but it felt like hours to Sarah, who never let go of her father's hand during the entire trip. She kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling him about her kids, about her husband's new job, about the house she and David had been looking at in Nashville because she'd decided California was too far from family. "The kids ask about Grandpa Tom all the time," she said, her words tumbling over each other in her desperation to keep him engaged. "Emma wants to know if you'll teach her to fish like you taught me, and Michael keeps asking when he can ride in Grandpa's fire truck, even though I've told him 100 times you retired." Tom wanted to respond, wanted to tell her that he'd kept his old fishing gear specifically hoping for the day when his grandchildren would be old enough to learn. He wanted to explain that he still had connections at the fire department, that arranging a truck visit for Michael would be easy. But his body was shutting down, conserving energy for the basic function of keeping his heart beating. The emergency room at University Medical was a controlled chaos of medical professionals who moved with the same purposeful efficiency Tom had once brought to fire scenes. As they transferred him from the helicopter gurney to the hospital bed, he heard fragments of medical terminology that his layman's understanding translated into very serious but possibly survivable. Sarah paced the trauma bay like a caged animal, her phone pressed to her ear as she called her husband, her mother-in-law, anyone who needed to know that her father was fighting for his life because he'd apparently decided to become some kind of wilderness superhero at the age of 67. "I don't care what time it is in California, David," she said into the phone. "Book the first flight you can get. Bring the kids. If Dad—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but Tom heard the break in her voice and felt his own eyes fill with tears. As the medical team worked around him, Tom found himself thinking about the warmth of Luna's massive body pressed against his side, about the trust in her eyes when she'd asked him to save her second cub, about the intelligence that had led her to help him create the tools they'd needed for the rescue. He thought about Martha, who would have loved this story, and about Sarah, who was fighting for his life with the same fierce determination Luna had shown protecting her babies. Maybe some bonds really did transcend species. Maybe love and determination and the refusal to give up on family were universal languages that could bridge any gap. As consciousness faded, Tom's last thought was a promise to Luna. If he survived this, he'd make sure her story was told. The cardiac monitor's steady beeping was the first sound Tom recognized when consciousness crept back 3 days later, followed immediately by the antiseptic smell of the hospital and the soft sound of Sarah's voice reading aloud from what sounded like a children's book. His eyes felt heavy as concrete, but he managed to crack them open enough to see his daughter sitting beside his bed, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights spent keeping vigil. The bear cubs learned that winter was not just about survival, Sarah read, her voice hoarse with exhaustion, but about the kindness that can exist between the most unlikely friends. She paused, noticing his slight movement. "Dad, are you awake?" Tom tried to speak but managed only a weak croak. Sarah immediately reached for the water cup with its bent straw, helping him take small sips while tears streamed down her cheeks. The water was the most beautiful thing he'd ever tasted, cool and clean, and proof that he was still alive to taste anything at all. "How long?" he whispered. 3 days, Sarah said, setting the cup aside and taking his hand in both of hers. "You had a massive heart attack, Dad. The doctors said—" They said it was touch and go for a while. The memories came flooding back. The rescue, the chest pain, the helicopter ride where Sarah had held his hand like a lifeline. But there was something else, something that made his chest tighten with dread that had nothing to do with his cardiac condition. "The story you were reading," Tom said, his voice growing stronger. "Where did it come from?" Sarah's expression shifted, becoming guarded. "It's been all over the news, Dad. The helicopter crew couldn't stop talking about what they saw at the rescue site. The disturbed snow, the bear tracks, the way that tree had been moved. Fish and Wildlife Service sent a team up there the next day to investigate." Tom's heart rate increased, setting off a warning beep on the monitor. "What did they find?" "Dad, you need to stay calm." "The doctors said—" "What did they find, Sarah?" His daughter's face crumpled slightly. "They found Luna, Dad, the mother bear. She was shot 3 times. Professional hunter, they think, based on the accuracy of the shots and the high-powered rifle used. They found her body about 2 miles from where they rescued you." The words hit Tom like a physical blow, stealing what little breath he had recovered. Luna, who had trusted him enough to work alongside him, who had shared her warmth when he was dying of cold, who had looked at him with those impossibly intelligent eyes, Luna was dead. "The cubs," he managed to whisper. Sarah's silence was answer enough, but she spoke anyway, her voice barely audible. "They found them too, both of them. Same rifle, same shooter. The wildlife officers said it looked like Luna was trying to protect them when it happened." Tom closed his eyes, seeing again Luna's massive head resting against his shoulder, feeling the weight of her trust and the warmth of her protection. She had saved his life, and he had been powerless to save hers. The injustice of it, the brutal senselessness, made his chest burn with something far worse than cardiac pain. "Do they know who?" Tom asked. "They have leads. Apparently there's been illegal hunting in that area for months. Big game poachers targeting bears for their gallbladders and paws, black market stuff for overseas buyers. The authorities think Luna and her cubs were specifically targeted because adult females with cubs are worth more to collectors." Tom felt something dark and hollow open up inside his chest. While he'd been unconscious, celebrating his own survival, the bear family he'd risked everything to save had been murdered for profit. The cubs he'd pulled from freezing water and freed from beneath crushing weight had died anyway, killed by human greed and cruelty. "There's more," Sarah said quietly. "The story has gone viral, Dad. Someone leaked the helicopter crew's report about finding you with the bears, and it's everywhere. Social media, news outlets, even some of the late-night talk shows. They're calling you the Bear Whisperer and making up all kinds of stories about what really happened up there." Tom's hands clenched into fists beneath the hospital blankets. The last thing Luna's memory deserved was to be turned into internet entertainment. Her death reduced to clickbait headlines and feel-good stories that ignored the brutal reality of what humans had done to her and her babies. "But that's not the worst part," Sarah continued, her voice dropping even lower. "The attention has brought out every hunter and thrill-seeker in the region. They're flooding the Smoky Mountains looking for more friendly bears to photograph or interact with. 3 more bears have been shot in the past 2 days, and the Park Service is talking about closing the entire area to public access." Tom stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of unintended consequences crushing down on him like that fallen oak tree. His rescue had saved Luna's cubs for exactly 3 days before human evil had found them anyway. Worse, his story had apparently painted a target on every bear in the mountains. Sometimes trying to save lives only delayed the inevitable. The television mounted on the hospital room wall had been muted, but Tom could see his own face staring back at him from the morning news broadcast. A grainy photo from his firefighting days, decades younger and full of the confidence that came from believing good actions led to good outcomes. The news ticker scrolled beneath his image. Bear Whisperer tragedy. Protected bears killed after viral rescue story. Tom reached for the remote with shaking hands, unmuting the broadcast just in time to hear the anchor's voice. "The hunter responsible for killing the bear family has been identified as Marcus Dalton, a professional guide who authorities say has been operating an illegal poaching ring in the Smoky Mountains for over 2 years. Dalton claims he was protecting the public from dangerous wildlife made aggressive by human contact." The camera cut to a press conference where a hard-faced man in hunting gear stood behind a cluster of microphones. Tom recognized the type immediately, the kind of man who justified cruelty with twisted logic and made violence sound like public service. "That old man up there interfered with the natural order," Marcus Dalton said, his voice carrying the flat certainty of someone who had never questioned his own righteousness. "When you start treating wild bears like pets, you create a dangerous situation for everyone. Those bears had lost their natural fear of humans, which makes them a threat that had to be eliminated." Sarah lunged for the remote, but Tom held it away from her, his jaw set with the same stubborn determination that had gotten him into this mess. He needed to hear this, needed to understand how his moment of compassion had been twisted into justification for murder. Furthermore, Dalton continued, the media circus surrounding this so-called rescue has brought hundreds of unprepared tourists into bear habitat, creating exactly the kind of dangerous human-wildlife interactions that conservation experts have warned against for decades. My actions prevented what could have been multiple human fatalities. The reporter pressed closer. Mr. Dalton, you're facing federal charges for illegal hunting on protected land, possession of endangered species parts, and operating an unlicensed guide service. How do you respond to critics who say this was about profit, not protection? Dalton's expression hardened. I've been hunting these mountains for 30 years. I know these animals better than any desk jockey bureaucrat or bleeding heart do-gooder. Sometimes protecting people means making hard choices that city folks don't have the stomach for. Tom felt bile rise in his throat. This man had turned Luna's trust, her intelligence, her love for her cubs into ammunition for his own defense. The bear who had shared her warmth with a dying stranger was being portrayed as a dangerous predator who had to be destroyed for public safety. But the news report wasn't finished. The anchor returned to camera, her expression grave. In a disturbing development, authorities have discovered that Dalton's poaching operation was far more extensive than initially believed. Fish and Wildlife Service raids on 3 properties linked to Dalton have uncovered evidence of a black market trade in bear parts worth an estimated $2 million annually. The screen filled with crime scene photos that made Tom's stomach clench, bear paws, gallbladders, and other body parts prepared for shipment to overseas buyers who believed in their medicinal properties. Sarah tried to change the channel, but Tom's grip on the remote tightened. The investigation has revealed that Luna, the mother bear who worked alongside retired fire captain Tom Mitchell in the now famous rescue, was specifically targeted because of her unusual behavior, the anchor continued. According to wildlife experts, bears who show reduced fear of humans are considered more valuable to collectors as they're easier to track and kill. Tom's vision blurred with tears he was too proud to let fall. Luna hadn't been killed because she was dangerous. She'd been murdered because her kindness toward him had made her vulnerable. Her trust in humanity had literally painted a target on her back. The hospital room door opened quietly, and Dr. Elizabeth Harper entered, her expression sympathetic but firm. She was the cardiologist who had been managing Tom's care, a woman in her 50s with silver hair, and the kind of competent authority that reminded him of Martha. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you to turn off the television, Doctor," Harper said, checking the cardiac monitor that was showing increasingly erratic readings. "Your stress levels are spiking, and that's dangerous given the extent of your cardiac damage." "Doctor, he won't listen to me," Sarah said, her voice tight with frustration and worry. "He's been obsessed with this story since he woke up." Tom finally looked away from the screen, meeting Dr. Harper's concerned gaze. "How much damage?" he asked. "Significant," she replied honestly. "The heart attack was massive, and the physical stress you endured during the rescue created additional complications. You'll need extensive cardiac rehabilitation, lifestyle changes, and possibly surgery depending on how you respond to treatment." "How long do I have?" Dr. Harper sat down in the chair beside his bed, her expression softening. "That depends entirely on you, Mr. Mitchell. With proper care, medication compliance, and significant lifestyle modifications, you could have years ahead of you. But if you continue to stress yourself with things you can't control, if you don't follow medical advice," she shrugged meaningfully. Tom nodded, understanding the unspoken message. His heroics in the mountains had saved Luna's cubs for 3 days and nearly killed him in the process. Now Luna and her babies were dead anyway, and he was left with a damaged heart and the knowledge that his good intentions had made everything worse. But as he was about to surrender the remote, the news broadcast shifted to something that made him freeze. The camera was focused on a young woman standing outside the federal courthouse, someone Tom didn't recognize but who seemed familiar somehow. This is Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a wildlife biologist who has been studying bear behavior in the Smokies for the past 5 years, the reporter's voice explained. Dr. Walsh claims to have evidence that could change our understanding of what really happened during the rescue. The young woman stepped closer to the microphones, her voice steady despite the chaos of reporters shouting questions. I've been tracking the bear family that Mr. Mitchell encountered for over 18 months as part of my doctoral research. Luna wasn't just any bear, she was part of a groundbreaking study on bear intelligence and problem-solving abilities. Tom's heart rate spiked again, but this time with hope rather than despair. Luna had already demonstrated tool use, cooperative behavior with her cubs, and what appeared to be planning and foresight, Dr. Walsh continued. Her interaction with Mr. Mitchell wasn't random. It was the culmination of months of observed behavior that suggested she understood human intentions and could distinguish between threats and assistance. Sarah grabbed Tom's free hand, squeezing tightly as they both stared at the screen. Furthermore, Dr. Walsh said, her voice growing stronger, I have video evidence that proves Marcus Dalton had been stalking Luna's family for weeks, waiting for the right opportunity to kill them. This wasn't about public safety. It was about eliminating a bear whose intelligence made her too valuable to poachers and too dangerous to those who profit from their deaths. For the first time since waking up, Tom felt something other than despair flooding his chest. Luna's story wasn't over. Dr. Jennifer Walsh arrived at the hospital 2 days later, carrying a laptop bag and the kind of nervous energy that Tom recognized from young firefighters about to testify in arson cases. She was younger than Sarah, probably in her early 30s, with the practical clothes and calloused hands of someone who spent more time in the wilderness than behind a desk. When she shook Tom's hand, her grip was firm and steady, despite the slight tremor in her voice. Mr. Mitchell, I can't tell you how important your testimony will be for the federal case against Marcus Dalton, she said, setting up her laptop on the hospital room's rolling table. But more than that, I need you to understand what you witnessed up there, what you were actually part of. Sarah had positioned herself in the corner chair, her expression skeptical. Since Tom's heart attack, she'd become fiercely protective of his energy and stress levels, viewing every visitor as a potential threat to his recovery. Doctor, my father has been through enough. If this is just about building a legal case, it's about Luna, Dr. Walsh interrupted gently, her eyes never leaving Tom's face. It's about making sure people understand what she really was. What was lost when Dalton killed her? Tom nodded slowly, ignoring the way his chest tightened at Luna's name. Show me. The first video was time-stamped 6 months earlier. The laptop screen showed Luna teaching her cubs to fish in a shallow stream. But what struck Tom immediately was the methodical way she demonstrated the technique, not just showing them where to catch fish, but actually positioning their paws, correcting their stance, repeating the lesson until they understood. This is unprecedented behavior, Dr. Walsh explained, her academic excitement overriding her nervousness. Most bear mothers show cubs what to do through example, but Luna was actively teaching, breaking down complex tasks into learnable steps. The second video made Tom's breath catch. Luna was using a stick to extract grubs from a rotting log, but she wasn't just using any stick, she had modified it, stripping away branches and sharpening one end against a rock until it was the perfect tool for the job. More remarkably, when her cubs tried to imitate her, she corrected their technique, showing them how to prepare their own tools. Tool modification and active instruction, Dr. Walsh said. We're talking about cognitive abilities that were previously documented only in primates and a few bird species. But it was the third video that made Tom's eyes fill with tears, The timestamp showed it was recorded just 2 weeks before his encounter with Luna's family. The bear was at the edge of the same lake where Tom had found the first cub, and she was actually practicing, rescue techniques with a piece of driftwood, using sticks to pull the wood to shore from increasingly difficult positions. She was preparing, Tom whispered. She knew her cubs might fall through the ice, so she was figuring out how to save them. Dr. Walsh nodded solemnly. Luna had already attempted 12 different rescue scenarios with various objects over the course of 2 weeks. When her cub actually fell through the ice, she wasn't panicking. She was implementing strategies she'd already tested. The fourth video was the one that changed everything. It showed Marcus Dalton, clearly recognizable despite the hunting camouflage, setting up cameras around Luna's territory. The timestamp proved he had been tracking the bear family for weeks, documenting their behavior patterns, learning their routines. Dalton wasn't hunting randomly, Dr. Walsh explained, her voice hardening with anger. He was conducting surveillance, waiting for the perfect opportunity to kill Luna while making it look like a public safety necessity. Your rescue attempt provided him with the justification he needed. Tom stared at the screen, watching Dalton methodically place motion-activated cameras in trees around Luna's den site. The man's movements were professional, patient, calculating. This wasn't a hunter reacting to dangerous wildlife. This was a predator stalking his prey. "There's more," Dr. Walsh said, clicking to another file. This was recorded by one of Dalton's own cameras, probably by accident. The final video was the hardest to watch. It showed Luna's final moments, but not the way Dalton had described them to the media. Luna wasn't aggressive or threatening. She was trying to lead her cubs away from danger when Dalton's shots rang out. Even after being wounded, she positioned herself between the rifle and her babies, using her own body as a shield until the very end. "She died protecting them," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. "More than that," Dr. Walsh replied. "Watch her eyes in the final seconds." Tom forced himself to look closer, and what he saw there made his damaged heart nearly stop. In Luna's dying eyes, he could see recognition, not just of the danger, but of the betrayal. She had trusted humans because of her experience with Tom, and that trust had been used against her. Sarah moved from her corner chair to sit on the edge of Tom's hospital bed, taking his hand as tears finally spilled down his cheeks. "Dad, this isn't your fault. You couldn't have known." "But I did know," Tom interrupted, his voice broken. "I knew she was special, that she was different. I should have realized that making her trust humans would put her in danger, Doctor." Walsh closed the laptop and leaned forward, her expression intense. "Mr. Mitchell, Luna's intelligence wasn't your fault, and her death wasn't your responsibility. But what you did with her, that cooperation, that partnership, it proved something that could revolutionize how we understand wildlife consciousness and animal rights." She pulled out a thick folder of documents. "Dalton's case goes to trial next month. Your testimony, combined with this video evidence, could put him away for 20 years and shut down his entire poaching operation. But more importantly, it could establish legal precedent for treating highly intelligent animals as something more than property." Tom looked at the folder, then at Sarah, then back at Dr. Walsh. "What are you asking me to do?" "Help us tell Luna's real story," she said simply. "Not the internet version about the bear whisperer, but the truth about a remarkable animal who showed compassion to a stranger and died because humans exploited that compassion for profit." Sarah squeezed Tom's hand. "Dad, you don't have to decide right now. The doctor said you need to focus on recovery." "No," Tom said, his voice gaining strength. "Luna saved my life, and I couldn't save hers. The least I can do is make sure her death means something." Dr. Walsh nodded, gathering her materials. "There's something else, Mr. Mitchell. Something I haven't told the media yet." Tom waited, dreading another revelation. 3 days ago, our research cameras detected 2 juvenile bears in Luna's territory. They're not her cubs. Those were confirmed killed with Luna. But they're young bears, orphaned, and they've been observed using some of the same tool modification techniques Luna demonstrated. She was teaching more than just her own family. The words hit Tom like a physical blow, but this time it was hope that stole his breath. She was spreading knowledge. Luna's influence is still alive in those mountains, Mr. Mitchell. Her cubs died, but her legacy, the things she learned and taught, that survived. If we can protect the area, establish it as a research preserve instead of hunting grounds, Luna's discoveries could change everything we know about animal intelligence. Tom closed his eyes, seeing again Luna's massive head resting against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of her trust and the weight of her sacrifice. Maybe some rescues took longer than expected. Maybe some lives were saved not in moments of crisis, but through the slow work of justice and the patient building of better tomorrows. "Tell me what you need me to do," Tom said, opening his eyes to meet Dr. Walsh's grateful gaze. It was time to honor Luna's memory with more than just grief. 6 months after testifying in Marcus Dalton's trial, Tom Mitchell stood once again at the edge of Bear Creek Lake, but this time he wasn't alone. Sarah walked beside him, her arm linked through his, while his grandchildren, Emma, now 10, and Michael, 8, raced ahead through the snow, their laughter echoing off the mountain peaks like music Martha would have loved to hear. The lake was different now. A bronze plaque mounted on a stone cairn marked the spot where Luna had trusted a stranger with her cubs' lives, and where that trust had ultimately led to groundbreaking legal protections for intelligent wildlife. The Luna Wildlife Research Preserve stretched for 30 square miles around them, funded by donations that had poured in after the trial, when Dr. Walsh's videos had finally shown the world what Tom had experienced firsthand: the remarkable intelligence and compassion of a wild mother who had chosen to work with humans rather than fear them. "Tell us again about the bear, Grandpa," Emma called back, her cheeks pink with cold and excitement. She never tired of the story, and Tom never tired of telling it, though he'd learned to focus on Luna's wisdom and courage rather than the tragedy that followed. "Well," Tom said, settling onto the bench that the Park Service had installed facing the lake, "Luna was the smartest bear anyone had ever studied. She could solve problems that most animals couldn't even understand, and she taught her cubs things that no bear had ever been seen teaching before." Michael scrambled up onto the bench beside him, his small body radiating warmth against Tom's side. "And she saved your life." "We saved each other," Tom corrected gently, the way he always did. "That's what families do. They take care of each other, even when it's scary or dangerous." Sarah sat on Tom's other side, her presence a constant reminder of how much had changed since that Thanksgiving morning when he'd planned to scatter Martha's ashes and surrender to loneliness. The ashes were still in their honored place on his mantelpiece, but now they shared space with photos of family dinners, birthday parties, and little league games, evidence of a life rebuilt around connection rather than isolation. "The doctor said your heart is doing really well, Dad," Sarah said quietly, her words creating small clouds in the crisp air. "Better than they expected after everything you went through." Tom nodded, touching the spot on his chest where the surgical scar had healed to a thin white line. The physical therapy had been grueling, the dietary changes challenging, but every step of recovery had been motivated by the knowledge that Luna's story needed him to survive to tell it. The book he'd written with Dr. Walsh, Luna's Legacy, When Wildlife Chooses Trust, had become a bestseller, with all proceeds funding wildlife research and protection programs. Emma had wandered closer to the lake's edge, pointing excitedly at something in the snow. "Grandpa, are these bear tracks?" Tom rose carefully from the bench, his movement still cautious after months of cardiac rehabilitation, and walked to where his granddaughter was crouched beside a series of large, unmistakable paw prints in the fresh snow. His heart rate increased, but not from exertion, from recognition. "Those are fresh," Sarah observed, automatically moving closer to the children with the protective instincts that parenthood had awakened in her. Tom knelt beside Emma, studying the tracks with the expertise that 6 months of working with wildlife researchers had given him. The prints were large, definitely from an adult bear, and they led from the forest directly to the lake's edge before circling back toward the trees. But what made Tom's breath catch was the smaller set of tracks beside them, cub prints, 2 distinct sets, indicating a mother with twins. "Dr. Walsh said there might be a new family in the area," Tom said, his voice carefully neutral despite the excitement building in his chest. "The preserve has been working really well. Bears are starting to feel safe here again." As if summoned by his words, movement in the tree line caught Tom's attention. A large brown shape moved between the pines, pausing just long enough for Tom to make out the distinctive form of a female bear with 2 cubs. The bears were perhaps 100 yards away, well within the safe viewing distance that Dr. Walsh had established for the preserve, but close enough for Tom to see the mother's careful assessment of the human family at the lake's edge. For a moment that felt suspended outside of time, Tom and the mother bear looked directly at each other. She was smaller than Luna had been, younger, but there was something in her posture, a alertness combined with caution rather than fear, that spoke to the changes the preserve had brought about. This bear had grown up in a world where humans could be protectors as well as threats. "Is that one of Luna's students?" Michael whispered, his young voice carrying a reverence that made Tom's chest tight with pride. "Could be," Tom said softly. "Dr. Walsh has been tracking several bears in the area who show some of the same problem-solving behaviors Luna demonstrated. It's like she passed on her knowledge before she died." The mother bear watched them for another long moment, then made a decision that would have been unthinkable in the days before the preserve. Instead of melting back into the forest, she led her cubs to the lake's edge, perhaps 50 yards from where Tom's family stood. The cubs, emboldened by their mother's calm demeanor, began playing in the snow while she kept watch. Sarah's hand found Tom's arm, her grip tight with wonder. "They're not afraid of us." "They're not trusting us either," Tom replied, remembering Dr. Walsh's careful distinctions about wildlife behavior. "They're just going about their business while keeping us in sight. That's exactly what healthy coexistence looks like." Emma raised her small hand in a tentative wave toward the bear family, and Tom felt his heart skip when the mother bear actually seemed to acknowledge the gesture with a slight tilt of her head before returning her attention to her cubs. "Look at that," Tom murmured, pulling out his phone to capture a photo that he would later send to Dr. Walsh. "A year ago, any bear in these mountains would have run the moment they saw humans. Now we can share the same space peacefully." The bear family stayed at the lake's edge for perhaps 10 minutes, the cubs drinking from the clear water while their mother maintained her protective vigil. When they finally moved back toward the forest, the mother bear paused once more to look in Tom's direction, and he could swear he saw something like acknowledgement in that gaze. Not Luna's desperate trust, but something equally valuable: respect between species who had learned to coexist. As the bears disappeared into the trees, Emma turned to Tom with the serious expression she wore when processing something important. "Grandpa, do you think Luna can see what happened? Do you think she knows her story helped save other bears?" Tom considered the question with the gravity it deserved. Martha had always insisted that love was the one force in the universe that transcended physical death, and watching his granddaughter grapple with concepts of loss and legacy, he found himself believing her more than ever. "I think Luna's spirit is in every bear who feels safe enough to drink from this lake," he said finally. "Every time we choose to help instead of harm, every time we build bridges instead of walls, we're honoring what she taught us." Michael tugged on Tom's jacket sleeve. "Can we come back next Thanksgiving, Grandpa? Can this be our new tradition? Tom looked around at the memorial plaque, the pristine wilderness of the preserve, the fresh bear tracks in the snow, and the faces of his family gathered around him. A year ago, he'd come to these mountains to say goodbye to the past. Today, he was planning for a future filled with the kind of connections Luna had shown him were possible. Every Thanksgiving, he promised, pulling both grandchildren close. And maybe Easter and summer vacation and any other time we want to remember that the best parts of life happen when we take care of each other. Sarah linked her arm through his again as they walked back toward the parking area, where Dr. Walsh waited beside her research vehicle, eager to hear about the bear sighting and add it to her ongoing study of post-Luna behavioral patterns. Behind them, fresh snow began to fall, covering their footprints and the bear tracks alike. But the connections forged in this place, between species, between generations, between past loss and future hope, would endure long after the winter gave way to spring. Sometimes the most important rescues are the ones that save us from our own isolation, teaching us that love doesn't diminish when shared, it multiplies. After decades of wondering if their own sacrifices mattered, many of us discover that the bridges we build in small moments of courage can span generations, creating legacies of connection that outlast our own lifetimes. The loneliness that feels so permanent at 60 can transform into the deepest joy we've ever known when we realize our wisdom, our stories, and our capacity for love are exactly what our families have been waiting for. Have you experienced a moment when helping someone else actually saved you? What family tradition would you want to create to bridge the generations in your own family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the stories we think are too small to matter are exactly the ones that need to be told.